Here's the fuel tank that I'm going to use for my evaporator that I'm building. As you can see, I've already got my lines marked here for where I'm going to cut it. So what I did, my evaporator pan is 48 inches this way. So obviously I got a little setback here. It's 3/4 of an inch. So I did my line back over here at 49.5. So it'll give me 3/4 of an inch of a gap, you know, to center the pan on. And then for this line here, I put a level on top of the tank, got the tank level, and then I just measured up from the ground. I went 36 inches up, there and there, threw a level on here, the line is level. Did the same on the other side. And now it's time to cut it. You can cut it with a plasma cutter, torch, or cutoff wheel if that's all you have. So now I've got the top part cut off of the barrel, and I am going to reuse this end here. And so what I did to get this to separate from this was I went around the outside edge and just cut off like an 1/8 inch right here, because as you can see, this is just bent around. So if you cut it right here, this would all separate. So I did that on the top part. Now this piece, I'm going to take it and clamp it up into here, and I'll weld that in as my back plate for the back of the stove. And then next we're going to weld in some angle iron all the way around. That'll stiffen that up, and it'll also give a shelf for the pan to sit on. Now I'm hoping to be able to reuse this piece here and use that, because I'm going to make a shelf that comes up and then goes back like this. For the wood will burn here. We don't need the whole thing filled with wood. Just this little area will be more than sufficient to heat the whole tank up. So we're going to do that to kind of divide off the tank. Like I said, hopefully that'll work. We're going to try to straighten that out. If it doesn't, I'll have to go to a metal shop and get some flat steel. And then we're going to use, this guy here as a template for when we cut this piece. So we're going to need one more piece like this, but only it's going to be taller, and that'll serve as the back wall for the burn area. So I'll use this to trace out the bottom of the piece that gets welded in there. So I've got the top part of the barrel. I just put a few pieces of wood underneath it, jumped on it, and allowed it to flatten out. So I got it somewhat flat enough to trace out my oval there for the sidewall. So this will be the dividing wall, and then this here will be the shelf piece there. I got to figure out what length I'm going to have it, so I'll have to trim this end off. And then where this hole is here and that pipe is there, I'll just patch over that with a little flat piece of steel to plug that hole. And then once I get them all cut and put them in here, I will use pieces of angle iron that I'll weld on to the inside to hold the metal up, and then I'll also be able to use that to get it so it's straight and flat. I've got a bunch of old bed frames laying around here. They're fantastic. Every time I see one that's free, I always grab them, because that angle iron is perfect steel to use for different projects. And so that's what I'll use to add rigidity to it, and also give it a place for me to weld to. The thing with the bed frames is they are a slightly harder steel, so if you're going to cut them with a saw, they will dull your blade quite quickly, and frankly, some of the blades, they won't actually cut it, so you got to use a chop saw in order to cut them. All right, so I'm going to get that done, and then I'll show you what it looks like once I get them all tacked into place. So here's what it looks like so far. I've got my angle iron pieces welded in all the way around. I just tacked it up there, and then I only stitched it a couple of spots just to help hold it in place a little bit better. But when I put this piece in over the top, this is going to get welded all the way around to the outside to seal up all the air so no air can seep through there. So I'm not too worried about that welded super well. This is another piece of that tank. It's got the cup to it like this, so I figured I would put it in this way, and then I'll weld the back side down, and I'll just keep pushing it down as I go, and it'll make a nice flat surface. There was a fitting here, so I cut that fitting out, and then I got a couple of plates on the welder that I'm going to just weld on a plate to cover that hole. So before I weld this guy in place here, I'll go ahead and just install this guy so that I can get these bolts easier. I'm not having to reach through like this just be a little bit easier, and I could put a impact on the bottom and tighten those nuts up. All right, so I've got everything kind of tacked on. I've got this tacked on out here. I did this backwards instead because I wanted a flat edge to weld to. If I'd have done it the other way, I would have had a gap here. And so I also pounded this flat here. You can see there's a little bit of a dip in the metal. So we just pounded that flat. So I got that straight across there. Then what I did is I measured from here to here, and I got that measurement to be the same as this one from here to here. That's gonna make it so that this is square to the front. So I put the pan and it's not crooked. You can kind of see we're off just a little bit here, just because all the heating and warping, and you could see that the front just kind of warps. The front is twisted like this a little bit. And so when I put the pan on, it's actually a little low right here. So a couple of things, I just tacked this together. I did a bunch of tacks here, made it a little stronger on the back, did a tack here, and I could pick this up and move it up and down. So I don't have it welded to the actual tank. And my reason for that is I want to make sure that once I get it all squared up and it's ready to get welded in, I want to make sure that this is as flat as possible so that there's no gap. So if this side is low, I can come back and just pop this up a little bit and then weld it in place. And now I don't have to worry about there being an air gap and smoke being able to get in and out of there. So I'm going to go ahead and get this thing squared up. All right, so what I ended up doing is I took this frame off. I had it all tack welded. I took it off, put it on the ground, and I squared it up, and then I welded a solid bead in all the joints here and then back there as well. And then I put it back on here and pounded it into place to help pry it into place. And I had to do a ratchet strap from here to here. You know, you got to get creative with the ratchet straps to get it to pull right. I did one here as well, which helped pull it in a little bit more, get it more square. But now that I've got everything welded in place, this is still free. It's snug, but it's free, so I can move it around. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the evaporator pan on top of here, and then I'm going to level this out, and then I'm going to tack the angle iron in place to the tank. And once I get it all tacked into place, I'm going to pull the tank off, and then happy welding. That's what I'll do for the next hour or so, is get everything all welded into place so it's all solid. And I'll have to cut a piece. I'm going to cut a piece that goes from probably from like right here to here, a piece of angle iron just for support so it doesn't warp as it heats up. Cut a couple of pieces of angle iron here from a, you guessed it, bed frame. And I'm going to use these, I'm going to weld them in place so that this tank stays in place. If you bump it, it's not going to fall off. And then a little chunk of flat stock on the front here. And I'm going to leave about a 1/16 to an 1/8 inch gap, probably an 1/8 inch gap on this one and a 1/16 gap on these ones here, just to make sure that if it expands or contracts at all, it's still going to come on and off easy enough. And I've got enough of a lip, I've got about a 1/2 inch lip all the way around that I could put my gasket on still. So getting the outside here to push against here, because it's bowed in several spots, can be really tricky. And it requires a strong clamp right here, a C clamp if you have one, or a vice grips with a big C claw. But if you don't have that, I don't know where mine is, just cut a piece of wood that is a little bit longer than the distance, and then you just tap that side in, and it will push the barrel against the angle iron and give you a nice clean straight edge. All right, so I've got everything all welded up solid here. Beads are all laid, everything's airtight. I flipped it on its side and I ended up welding on the inside instead. It looks kind of cruddy, but it's kind of a hard weld to get at. And then I put this support in here. I notched it out so that this could be flat. I still need to grind that a little smoother there so it's more flush. And I started putting in the fire brick too. So what I did for that is I put a piece of angle iron here to hold it in place here. I butted this up good and tight to the brick so that it just doesn't have as much play. And then down here, I had a piece of angle iron that was the right thickness, so I welded that in place. I started at the top and worked my way down. As you can see, I left about a 1/2 inch gap up here. And so what that's going to do is it's going to enable me to slide this brick up, and then I could pop this bottom brick out. So if I need to replace a brick down the road, I can do that. It won't be a big deal. And then there's a little bit of a gap here. Oops. A little bit of a gap here. So what I did is I just took a couple chunks of angle iron that I had laying around. So some of these had a little bit bigger gap in them than the other ones. So what I did is I just kind of tack welded a little bead there to tighten it up. So I put this in here and just kind of push it in place. I'm not going to pound it in because I don't want to break the fire brick. But then what that does is you see the bricks are a lot more snug. They don't bounce around as much. So just use some scraps for that. Did the same thing on this side. Angle iron up top. I got to finish welding this in place. Same on the other side. And then down here, because it curves, I laid them this way. And I put a piece of smaller angle iron down here to hold them in place. So these will actually pop out or slide out, just coming straight out. You got to kind of wiggle them and finesse them to get them out. But I'm not too worried about them popping out because gravity's helping those stay in place a little better than these up here. Now you'll see I didn't add a floor. A lot of people will add a floor to the bottom of the barrel and then they'll put brick on top of that. Instead of adding a floor and putting brick on top of that, these bricks are like, they're 20 bucks for 6 of them. So if I were to do that, it'd probably cost me another 40 bucks in fire brick. So what I'm gonna do instead is I've got a bunch of ashes from the wood stove in the house, in the shop. I've been saving it up, and I'm gonna just fill this whole bottom in with ash. Ash is an excellent insulator, and it's gonna insulate way better with the 6 to 8 inches of ash in here than it would with the fire brick. So I'll just bring the ash level up to somewhere right in here, and I'll always maintain that level ash on the bottom. So it's free insulation. And then I gotta work on this back wall here. I gotta cut all my goofy pieces so the bricks fit in there better. And then up here, what I'm gonna do is take the same type of angle iron I put here, that's the same thickness as the brick. I'm gonna weld that in all the way across here, and that'll hold the top part of the brick in place. And then I'll probably also do the same with these scrap pieces of angle iron, pop them up into place just to hold the brick tight against the wall here. And then might even have to do the same on the bottom, put a little shim in there to hold it in place, just to tighten everything up. So I'll get to finishing all that up and I'll show you what it looks like when we're done with that. So I've got all my bricks cut and installed, and to cut them what I used was a tile saw. Found one in a dumpster years ago and salvaged it. Worked pretty good. As you can see, they're still a little wet, but just cut them all, made them fit. They're not perfect, but they are close enough. I dumped some ash in the bottom here. I need to get a little more ash. I got 2 more buckets in the house, so I'll fill that up just a little bit more. Get myself a little more insulation on the bottom. So I had an axle laying around, so I just welded that onto the back side there. It's pretty heavy in the front. I'm gonna put a hitch on here and I'll just move it around with a skid steer. That's probably gonna be the easiest way to move it for me anyways. That'll be easier than just picking up from underneath with the skid and the forks and having to worry about it rolling and having the barrel tip over. And then as you can see, I put the gasket on here. I took some brake cleaner and cleaned everything off really well and then stuck the gasket on the inside edge here for the pan. So the next step is I'll put the pan on and then I'll put the fittings on and the thermometer on. And then I'm gonna make a mount that'll weld right on the side here. That'll, I'll probably have it so it drops in and there'll be 2 little fingers that stick out and that'll hold the bag or the filter. So I can put a bucket right underneath it and it'll just drip right into the filter and I don't have to hold it. All right, so here is the finished product. I haven't put this on yet, but I don't know that I'll do that this year, the little holder for the filter. The only thing that I really don't like about this tank here, the warming pan, is when I tighten this up, it doesn't get hard to turn. You have to bottom it out on the nut here, and it's upside down, which is really unfortunate. It said that it's supposed to be a pipe thread, so it should gradually get tighter, so I should have been able to get this set how I wanted it, but that wasn't the case. That of the pipe thread was just a little too big and was machined wrong. So that's the only beef I have about it. This pan is not one of those pans where you can let that trickle in and let this trickle out and it zigzags through. This is just simply a boiling pan, which I was aware of when I bought it. Eventually down the road, I might take this piece out and then move it over a little bit and drop it down all the way to the bottom, and then add a second one here, and then cut a hole in this one down here, and then cut a hole down there, so that it forces the sap to go down here, back up, and then back down, so by the time it gets here, it's a lot thicker. This, I'm just planning on doing a big batch of it, and I'll just slowly keep adding a little more to it as it goes and evaporate it that way rather than the other style. I don't have a big enough operation to justify spending the extra $600 on a pan just to have it zigzag. So that's something I'll do, like I said, later on down the road. So that's it. I do have 2 more pieces of stack that I'm going to put on here. So the longer the stack you have, the more draw will equal more heat. So it'll actually burn hotter in the actual chamber. So if you find that it's not burning hot enough, add another piece of stack on there and it should help quite a bit. So here's what the firebox looks like. Still got to add a little bit more on the bottom here, but it's all done and ready to burn. So after this season, I will take a wire wheel and clean off all the paint that didn't come off from burning, and then I will clean it up and paint it with a high temperature black paint. So this evaporator pan here I bought on homedepot.com. It shipped for free, and it came to me in just like 4 days. I bought the fireplace kit at Menards, and I've also bought them on Amazon before too. They're about the same price. I can put a link in the description for that. I'll put a link for the pan in the description as well. And then that stove pipe there, I bought that at Menards. It was the cheapest. It was only like $6 for the pipe. And then the fire brick I bought at Menards as well. And then the only steel that I had to purchase was this angle iron here. I bought it from a local metal fab guy. And then all the other stuff was just scraps that I had laying around the property. And then this gasket here I bought on Amazon, and I'll put a link in the description for that as well. So I hope this video was helpful to you. If you found that it was helpful, you learned something from this video, please hit that subscribe button. So thanks again for watching, guys. As always, I appreciate the feedback, and any questions or comments, please leave them down below in the comment section, and I will be sure to answer them as quick as possible.